For centuries, mankind has been fascinated with the stars. Many civilizations have to make sense of what could be observed from Earth. But the truth, like the stars themselves, remains out of reach. It wasn't until the 20th century that technology advanced far enough to give us a chance to escape the grip of the Earth's gravity. One of the first space rocket launch projects of the 20th century was based at Peenemünde on the German island of Usedom. Hidden under the pine trees just yards from the Baltic Sea are mounds of shattered concrete and twisted steel. This is all that remains of what was once Nazi Germany's most secret military installation, Test Stand 7. Dr. Philipp Aumann is director of the Historical Technical Museum at Peenemünde today. He has explored the history of these mysterious ruins.
Peenemünde was the first professional rocket project in Germany and in the world. Exploring space was a key topic of this future ideology. The engineers working here, they were nationalists, they were militarists, and they really had no problem serving Germany when they created this mighty, powerful weapon.
Governments were willing to fund this program because they wanted to have this military dominance in Europe. And so that flow of funding and the focused effort meant that rocket technology accelerated in a very short amount of time. I mean, just a few years to create something like the V2 was phenomenal.
In the early 20th century, the young engineer Werner von Braun, with his expertise in rockets, was just what Germany needed. A man who could create long-range weapons.
Werner von Braun was the leading rocket engineer here. He and his colleagues, they were engineers, and they had this technological challenge, and they wanted to solve it.
He was very enthusiastic about opening up the opportunities of rocketry for space exploration. I think even though that didn't play out during the war years, once he had moved to America, his work then became the foundations of the Apollo program, which took humans to the moon in the 1960s and 1970s.
Von Braun was given full backing by the German military. And when Hitler came to power, his rocket program shifted into top gear. In 1936, construction began at Peenemünde to create the first rocket testing range in the world. A special launch pad was constructed where rockets could be fired into the shallow waters of the Baltic and be recovered for analysis. This was Prüfungsstand 7, or Test Stand 7.
The whole sand wall is around here. It really closes the launching site, makes it an arena. This is the place where the rockets were launched exactly. They fired a little more than 300 rockets. I thought they were completely secret here, and nobody would find them.
In 1936, they had started their Peenemünde project to develop missiles of an entirely new type. And their first one was not a rocket. It was the buzz bomb, the V1. Its propulsion was by pulse jet engine. The Germans fired more than 7,000 of them, of which more than 2,000 reached London.
In October 1942 came the first successful launch of the rocket that would forever be associated with von Braun, the V-2. Though it only reached an altitude of 52 miles, it was a signpost to the future. Standing 46 feet high and with a diameter of just over 5 feet, the V-2 weighed 28,000 pounds and carried a ton of high explosive.
The V-2 missile is in itself an extremely impressive weapon. And arguably, it's the start of putting man on the moon and rocket technology. But around that rocket, you've got the infrastructure and the facility that enabled the Germans to do what they did with it. We're talking about refueling the rocket. We're talking about producing that fuel in the first place. The logistics of getting everything that they needed, the monitoring systems in place, and getting that rocket actually firing.
But Hitler had no interest in space research. He wanted weapons of war. Orders went out for the V-2s to start raining death on the Allies. But the new rocket was far from being an effective weapon.
The rockets never worked well. It was not a completely finished weapon system when it first was used. The whole history of testing and using it is a history of exploding and misfunctions.
The V-2 was developed and being tested whilst the Germans were at war with the Allies. So, albeit that V-2 rocket was not used for a purpose that we can celebrate, the engineering behind it was extremely thorough and very impressive.
In June 1944 came the historic launch from Test Stand 7, when a vertically launched V-2 crossed into space. Traveling at 4 times the speed of sound, von Braun's rockets were soon screaming down on defenseless civilians in London and Antwerp. But despite this powerfully destructive force, history tells us that it still wasn't enough to turn the war in the Nazi favor.
Hitler was obsessed with wonder weapons, and that's where all the money went. It was good for the US and the Allies at large because there weren't basic funding for infrastructure. There weren't enough tanks. People were riding bikes. It wasn't like state-of-the-art anything on the battlefield. And that's the irony.
In the end, as history shows, the Nazis were comprehensively defeated at the end of World War II, and many of its key V-2 launch sites, like Test Stand 7, were destroyed.